Okay, welcome back to another video on grammar. We're getting into a pretty complicated, pretty deep section of grammar here, okay? A deep understanding of grammar. And we're going to be talking about the internal structure of adjective clauses, okay? Remember, an adjective clause, you're going to see several examples, and I'm going to give you a lot of different opportunities to make sentences with adjective clauses. But remember, these are relative clauses. Means they cannot stand alone. What we call dependent. They depend on another part of a sentence to make them complete. And they have subject and verb agreement. Okay? So they have a subject and a verb, or a noun and a verb in them, okay? Subject to verb, noun and verb. And we're just going to take a look at some different adjective clauses and how to identify them, all right? And we're going to look at the structure, internal structure of adjective clauses. We're going to hop around a little bit, but the first thing I want to point out is this. It says, number one, the adjective clause is unusually complicated, so it is going to be a tough unit, so be prepared for that. And then all relative clauses must begin with a special pronoun called a relative pronoun, okay? So it must begin with a relative pronoun. And I'm going to show you some examples of the most common relative pronouns before we get started, all right? So these are the words that we're learning how to use. And I'm just going to take you to here. And this is a little chart that we're going to look at later. But these are the relative pronouns that we're working with. Who, that, which, where, and when. For everything human, we're going to use who, and whom, and whose. And these are the first relative pronouns that we're going to learn how to use in this video. Okay? We're going to learn, these are all relative pronouns, and we learn to use each form of these depending on the role that these relative pronouns plays in the adjective clause. Okay, that sounds very complicated, but it's really not. And so we're gonna take a look at that more closely now. So let's go ahead and come back here and take a look at these different pronouns. Okay. And you can read these sections. It's really important that you do. But let's start with this one, okay? It says the role of the relative pronoun inside its own clause. It says we choose between who, whom, and whose. Remember, these are just three relative pronouns, and we're figuring out the proper use of each one of these terms in a sentence, okay? It says we choose between who, whom, and whose, depending on the role of the relative pronoun. If the relative pronoun plays the role of subject, we must use who. If the relative pronoun plays the role of object, we must use whom. And if the relative pronoun is possessive, we must use whose. Okay, and I'll give you some sentences here. And don't worry about, subject, object, and possessive, okay? And we're going to take a look at each one of these. The possessive is really easy to see, okay? So this won't be a problem. But figuring out whether a relative pronoun is used as a subject or the object is a little bit more complicated. So we're going to take a look at this structure. Okay, so we're going to walk through these sentences. I'm going to show you what the antecedent is and what the pronoun is. Now remember, if the antecedent is human, we must use either who, whom, or whose, okay? Remember, these are adjective clauses. It says, he is a person who will always do the right thing. So person is the antecedent, and so we know we have to use one of these factors, who, whom, or whose. But which one? Okay, he is a person who will always do the right thing. Who is the subject of this little clause? How do I know that? Well, I know that because it's doing the action. Who will always do the right thing. So this little relative pronoun here is doing the action. Okay, it's the thing that's acting. Who will do the right thing. All right. So I know it's the subject. It says, please give your dues to Miss Walker, who is the treasurer of the organization. Once again, it's the subject because this is who he is. It's the linking verb, okay? The linking verb renames who is. Miss Walker is the antecedent, so we use who, and then we say who Miss Walker is, the treasurer of the organization. So who, once again, is the subject. All right. So let's take a look at some of these other examples. The musician who played for us today, the musicians who played for us today are all from local schools. The antecedent is musicians. This is human, so I have to use who, whom, or whose. Why do I use who? Because who is doing the action. It must be the subject. Okay, it's doing the action. So this is the subject, okay, of the adjectival clause. Okay, it's renaming musicians. Okay, and this is a adjectival clause. It says in this sentence, who is the subject of the verb played? Okay, who is playing? Who's doing the action? Okay, it's the subject. Okay. Relative pronoun plays the role of object. Now let's take a look at this. Is a little bit different. We've been learning how to use who when it's the subject. Okay. Now we're going to take a look at whom. How is this sentence different? Okay. Relative pronoun plays the role of object. He is a person. Okay. It deals with a human, so I must either use who, whom, or whose. I have to decide which one, and they use whom. He is a person whom I have always admired. Who do you admire? This admired is the object. This whom is the person being admired. The action is happening to the person. He does not admire, he's being admired. Okay, so that makes it the object. It says in this sentence, whom is the object of the verb admired, as in I have always admired him. Okay, whom I have always admired. So this is receiving the action. Okay, it's receiving the action of being admired. So whom is an object. All right, and remember, anytime it plays the role of the relative pronoun is the role of is an object, we always use whom. Let's look at a couple more examples. Please give your dues to Miss Walker, whom you all met earlier. Miss Walker is the antecedent. Because it's human, I must either use, and I'm going to erase these so we can look at this a little bit better. Okay, I need to either use who, whom, or whose. Okay, the relative pronoun has to be one of these things because the antecedent is a human. I'm describing it. Whom you all met earlier. Which Miss Walker? The one we met earlier, okay? Whom you all met. Now, we're going to use the object here because whom is receiving the action of being met. Whom did not meet anybody. Whom is being met. So Miss Walker, whom you all met earlier, okay? So because it's receiving the action of being met, it's the object. Okay, the object always receives the action. The subject, if we use who, the subject always does the action. Okay, so Miss Walker didn't do anything. She's receiving the object, the verb. She was met earlier. Okay, so whom is the correct form. Here, whom is the object of the verb met, as in we all met Miss Walker. Okay, the musicians whom we selected from local schools will play for us today. The musicians, obviously we're dealing with humans, so we must use who, whom, or whose. Whom we selected. Did the musicians select, or were they selected? Well, the musicians were selected. So whom is the object of selected. Okay, whom is not selecting anybody. they were selected. So the action is happening to the object. All right. So that's how we decide when to use who, whom. This is doing the action. This is receiving the action. Okay. The object is receiving the action. The subject is doing the action. So the musicians whom we selected earlier, it's the object because they are being selected. Okay. Relative pronouns as possessive. Now we're going to get into when to use whose. Possessive. Okay, this is a little easier. Mr. Smith, whose father founded the company. Well, whose father? Mr. Smith. Whose. Okay. The companies whose employees are full-time. Whose employees? The company's employees. So you have to use a possessive whose. Okay. Those bridges whose supports were damaged. Which supports were damaged? The bridge's supports. So you have to use the possessive whose. Okay. Okay, so basically that's what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to walk you through the first three, and we're going to take a look at when to use who, whom, or whose. Okay, this is the relative pronoun we're working with. Who, whom, and whose, because our antecedents are all people. So we have to use one of these relative pronouns. It's the most common, one of the most common relative pronouns. Okay, anybody wants to leave now may do so. Anybody who. Well, I have to replace this one, anybody, with it refers back to anybody. So this is the antecedent, anybody. Who. I chose who because I believe it's doing the action. Doing the action. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look. Who wants to leave now may do so. Who is the one that wants to leave? Okay. Anybody who wants to leave. Okay. So who is the subject? Okay. Let's take a look here. The person, and then I have to replace person with one of these relative pronouns. You met at the reception is Paul Kennedy. Well, you met. The person didn't do any action. Some action was done on the person. So I'm going to use whom. Okay? Because the person did not go out and greet anybody. He was met. Okay? The person whom you met at the reception is Paul Kennedy. Okay, let's do one more. Jason Grant, and I have to decide which relative pronoun is going to refer back to Jason Grant. Grants, and I can see the possessive here already. Jason Grants. So I'm going to use whose. Okay. Jason Grant, whose daughter is a friend of Susan's, teaches at MIT. Okay. Let's go ahead and do one more. Did you ever hear from the client who left a message for you yesterday? Oh, okay. This is definitely who. How do I know it's the who? Because they are the ones that left a message. Okay. The client is the one who left a message. So it's doing the action. It is who. It is the subject. Okay. So please refer back to the reading and figure out the proper use of who, whom, and whose. And we are going to be assessed on this, so you're going to have to know this. Get together with your partners, work collaboratively. If you have any questions, please come before or after school and I will help you out. Good luck, and go ahead and complete all the way through, I think it goes through 15 here. Yeah, all the way through 15. And then next time we're going to look at some more examples of when to use who, whom, and whose. I'll see you in the next video.